Welcome to Grappling with Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Jonas Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guests today. With me is Tim Hawkes, who's Managing Director of Unlimited Potential Coaching Specialists in the UK and Director of Global Operations. He is an international speaker and works with organizations to develop organizational culture. Sarah Calmedo, also known as Sarah the Pivoter, is a speaker, author, and relentless truth seeker. She is founder of Pivot Point International, a high-performance consulting company. And Yolanta Palmialto is Vice President of Information Technology for EXIF Worldwide, who manages innovative initiatives aimed at reducing operating costs, improving profit, and growing revenue. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
And here is our scenario for today. The following is a quote from ABC News Online. Quote, 3 days after a jury awarded her over $83 million for Donald Trump's repeated defamatory statements, columnist E. Jean Carroll vowed to use the money on, quote, something Donald Trump hates, unquote. Again, quote, if it'll cause him pain for me to give money to certain things, that's my intent, Carroll told George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, suggesting that she would create a, quote, fund for women who have been sexually assaulted by Donald Trump, unquote. Without discussing the case, the decision, or the former president, how are we to evaluate the ethics of using restitution money for the express purpose of inflicting pain on the accused or of withholding aid to victims of other perpetrators? Presumably, anyone would find it admirable that Ms. Carroll intends to use the money to help women who are victims of sexual assault, but is she essentially weaponizing the money to further punish a defendant already punished by the decision itself, and by doing so, depriving women victimized by other attackers of support they might desperately need? The floor is open.
So here's my view on this, okay? And how we're not going to mention the former president, I think I might struggle with that, but I'll do my best, Jonas, and I'll do my best. So in short, come on, let's get over it and move on, is my sort of thinking here. You know, it fits into the same bracket a little bit for me as the people who try and avenge somebody who's maybe there's been a murder in the family and they want to avenge the person who's caused them pain. In my view, in that if we don't let go, we carry that pain with us in some respects. So we're continuing the, if you like, that person who has wronged us continues to hurt us, or if we carry on holding this sort of pain and we're pushing it back. So I just wonder whether letting it all go, accepting where we're at and moving on might be better for our own mental health.
Well, I'll hope that the ladies pick up on that theme, because it's something that we firmly believe in Judaism, the importance of forgiveness and the damage we do to ourselves by holding a grudge. Practically speaking, I've struggled with this in a number of cases in my life. And Let It Go is a really nice Disney song, but I don't always know how to do that. So that would be an interesting angle to explore. But ladies, what do you think?
Yeah, I would, Tim, agree with you that when we hold on to something, it's like, holding on to sand, right? The tighter you squeeze it, the more it's going to flow out of your hand. And so you're really causing yourself additional pain. And all the different spiritual practices, religious practices, they talk about, releasing anger. And it doesn't mean that you condone the behavior, but it's making peace with it yourself so that you can be free. And I just read a quote this morning. I don't remember if it was Rumi or someone else, but it was essentially that, we're often just prisoners of our own mind, right? And so I think highlighting the fact that, specifically making a fund, if you will, for victims of this specific attacker, right? That's a very explicit and targeted action. Whereas it might be better to put that money towards victims that have had this experience, no matter who the attacker was, or to help them, in other ways so that they can learn how to cope and recover and heal themselves and find acceptance within themselves, no matter what the external circumstance is. Now, that's always easier said than done. Sexual assault is extremely high. I mean, the average is 1 in 4 Americans women will have experienced sexual assault by the time they're like 20. It's really high numbers, and that's not okay, right? That should not be taking place. So it's also on, in my view, parents to make sure that they are teaching their children, especially their sons and daughters, what respectful behavior is, what consent is, and having these narratives at younger ages. So this money might even be better spent to start programs of that nature, right? So that we can start to solve the root of the problem rather than, I think in your write-up, you talked about Batman, right? And avenging years and years later.
So true. So I think I'm not very familiar with the case, so I unfortunately I don't follow the details of the awards and the nuances of it all. But all I can say is, when you think about like revenge versus justice, I always think, is this an emotional, so revenge tends to be very much, we're human, we have this emotion, we want to right a wrong, we want to get somebody back, and versus justice is really, are we following the rules of the law? It's a very objective, we're trying to get restitution, right? So the difference there is, how do we create justice and to take the emotion a little bit out of it, and still compensate the victim for their pain and suffering, etc. So I mean, that's kind of my perspective, is just taking emotions out of it and really objectively truly finding something that's just to compensate any victim that's involved. And how she spends that money, I mean, that's kind of her decision. If the justice awarded her that compensation.
Yeah, I don't think we question her right to do whatever she wants to. But I think Sarah, you framed it well, that there are any number of ways that much money could be used to serve other victims, and that by limiting it so narrowly, it does start to look more like revenge, less like justice. And it might make her feel good, or as you said, Tim, it might end up just prolonging her sense of resentment and victimhood.
Indeed, I think I think the eye for an eye mentality that she's adopted here is going to chew her up. I think my view on this is, what she spends it on is not relevant, actually. I mean, if she's chosen what sounds like a laudable cause, okay, it is very focused, I give you that. I think for me, it's the way in which she's done it. It's the way in which it's framed. So, the intent doesn't appear to be to help those people she's giving the money to. The intent appears to be, stab somebody in the back whilst I'm doing it. Now, how are we going to help these victims who have been genuinely hurt? It's like going up to somebody and saying, I'm so sorry to hear that you've been sexually abused, and looking over at somebody else and going, I'm doing good work for charity here. I'm doing good work for charity. And we're not helping that person fully. And that for me, feel a bit uncomfortable about that. So I think I'm not here to judge what she gives the money to. That's entirely up to her. But I think the intent and the loudness with which she's done it starts to be a little bit troubling. I also think there's an irony here, because I think the nature of the behavior, particularly in this case, of her wanting to keep going and keep delivering the pain, is probably what got her through to the point of delivering this successful judgment. She's kept going, hasn't she, for years to get here. And maybe she doesn't know how to stop. Maybe she's stuck and in this reciprocal battle. But it's her mindset that's got her to where she is, and now she's carrying on. My experience tells me ultimately it will, if it continues in this method, it will eat us up, as any form of retribution ultimately does.
Yeah, not being able to stop is a theme I think we could apply in a number of different areas, but But when you mention an eye for an eye, and as a rabbinic scholar, I do want to mention that the sage's interpretation of that verse is not the way most people understand it. You don't get your hand cut off when you steal. You don't get your eye gouged out, even if you gouge out somebody else's. It's really talking about financial restitution, compensating people for how that will affect the rest of their lives, their pain, their suffering, their medical bills, their loss of income. But it's phrased that way to give us a sense of accountability, that when we do harm to others, we really deserve to have the same done to us. But that's not the purview of the court. And it is important for us to know that in this world, there's no real justice. Courts try to restore a measure of balance, but it's so subjective much of the time. And for some things, money is completely inadequate. So I think again, your point is well taken, that what one can do with that money to perhaps alleviate the suffering of others, that's really the best avenue for healing and real reparation.
Yeah, Jonas, and you're right on how many times different individuals, experience a difficult situation and they use that situation to either educate others or to say this will never happen again to another individual. So they almost find purpose in trying to prevent similar. And I mean, just as an example, like if you look at the mass shootings, right, at schools, like the parents who have been victims of who have lost a child to a mass shooting, they're very much advocates for gun control, and they're using this terrible situation to advocate so this never happens again in another school. So I think sometimes what we could do is using a situation to propel us forward and to create positive change as part of the process, to create a sense of justice, I guess.
Sarah, any thoughts? Oh, I think you're muted.
Of course, it's bound to happen all the time.
Inevitable.
The human condition is fascinating, right? And what we feel every day, the thoughts that we have, I mean, we have like 60,000 thoughts a day, right? And we have to be really careful that we don't start to believe those things. And very often we start to attribute the things that happen to us, external events, or the things that we do are the truth. And so I think it's really important to remember that everyone's truth is different, right? It's not the Mandalorian, this is the way, right? There's different paths to, finding your own truth, to finding your own comfort, but it's where do we kind of come to this common ground where we can agree on the boundaries of safety, of respect, of love, and operate in that way. And so, I kind of just bring it back to that, in that, these topics that you always bring to us, Austin, are so gray because of this very nature, right? All of us are experiencing different realities right now on this Zoom call, on this podcast. And we need those perspectives so that we can help each other to gain some insight into perspectives that we haven't had before. And when we have those more intense emotions, like you said, it's easy to say, let it go, or sing a song. It's not always easy to do that in practice. Simple, but not easy. And so I think cultivating a practice around learning how to have equanimity, learning how to bring that into your life is something that we can all benefit from. And that, would likely see a shift in how we treated cases like this, and likely that we would even have less cases if we were all in that mode.
Yeah, it is somewhat astonishing to me, and I don't know. I just can't wrap my head around it. I never could. I mean, I grew up in a very politically conservative home, and yet, my father was someone who, he was really a holdover from the times of chivalry and the knights of old. And he just had a very basic respect for women. And the stories of violence and abuse that we still keep hearing, it was so foreign to the way I was brought up. It just kind of boggles my mind that this is still going on in these days.
I often find myself thinking a lot of isms out there that boggle my mind as to how they've come about. But just to go back to what Sarah said, first of all, I'd love to be a Mandalorian. That would be amazing. But we're here discussing grappling with the grey, aren't we? And what I think is really interesting about this is we are grappling. Here we are. We're grappling with the grey. It's happening. It's happening right now. What this lady isn't doing is grappling with the grey, and what people who are trying to get retribution back, and they're not grappling with the grey. They are in the black and white. Thank you very much. I know what I'm doing. I've got this clear. I'm going to get my own back. This is good. Come on, let's do it. And in my experience, people in the black and white world tend to start bipolarizing stuff. Sorry, not bipolarizing. That's polarizing stuff. So, when we get into the black, we find ourselves having to sort of form opinions, strong positions. And you talk about the mass gun shootings in schools. It doesn't happen in Europe. It just doesn't happen. So for us looking across the pond, we all frown and go, why is this happening over there? Because it doesn't happen here. But it does polarize people. And, I've got a friend of mine who lives in America who's saying, that the wearing of a mask during COVID in America became almost it became a religious thing. Should I wear one? Should I not? Type thing. And there are examples all around the world of people polarizing. But if we live in black and white, we end up starting to have to, form an opinion on this, get strong with this. And as we do that, we separate. And I think when we grapple with the grey, as we're doing now, we don't separate, we come together because we're different, but we're all willing to accept and be open-minded. Now, in my experience, nourishment, fulfillment, flow, and all those things come out of having those meaty grey, I don't really get this type conversations where I try and understand a different point of view. And my sense is that isn't when we're in a space of retribution, we don't get that nourishment. We become more and more lonely.
I think you're right, Tim, that the polarization, I mean, pretty much by definition, creates an us versus them mindset. And then it's all about winning. It's all about punishing. And then we convince ourselves that we are the agents of justice because we're on the side of right and they're on the side of wrong. And it does become religious. So anybody who doesn't agree with us is a heretic or an infidel, and infidels must die. And we see that. We see it in our politics. I mean, I think it's been probably 15 or 20 years since I read an article that for many people, politics today is the new religion, especially in a world culture where religion is becoming less universal than it was a couple of generations ago. Politics takes the place of that. And that's why we don't find compromise. We don't find a willingness to seek that common ground that you were talking about. We don't feel motivated, or even, I mean, I had someone leave a comment. Don't discuss this issue because the settlement or the ruling was a travesty of justice. Well, I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Like you, Yolanta, I didn't follow the details of the case, and that's not what we're here to talk about. Rather, we're talking about how to respond in the wake of the judgment, and we have to be able to separate out these issues. Otherwise, we just chase our tails and wallow in the confusion. My friend Mark O'Brien, who is a regular guest, he writes in the comments, chivalry may not be dead, but courtesy, respect, and common sense seem to be on their last legs. Well, we hope it's not that bad.
Sounds bleak, doesn't it? That doesn't sound good at all.
But Tim, I agree with you. Anytime there's an open dialogue where you could see different perspectives and you could entertain different points of view, that's where magic happens, right? That's where people grow and we get to understand and be more empathetical with each other. And yeah, it's those, we do live in a very divided, polarized world, unfortunately.
Yeah. Getting those different viewpoints is what allows us to get the synergy that doesn't exist. Like if you hire all of the same people just like you,
Mhm.
it doesn't work. And you quickly realize that, but you don't know why. And I read this book last year called Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson. It's awesome. He breaks it down very simply. And even as you're reading about things that you may not like about yourself, you're kind of chuckling, right? So it makes it very accessible, and he shows you why when you put all of the same type of person together, progress doesn't happen, right? Because you got all the alphas together, everybody just wants to be right. So they spend all their time fighting rather than solving a problem. And, so many things like that. And so the more we can bring curiosity to the table, the more we can begin to understand. And it doesn't mean you have to accept the belief of somebody else or condone a behavior that they've done. It just means that you can understand better what their perspective of the world is, what their truth is. And ultimately, that helps all of us navigate better and find solutions of how we can, coexist. And it doesn't have to be this like, oh, you're a vegan. Well, I'm a carnivore and therefore I hate you. Like, it sounds ridiculous when I say that, but that's what happens when we talk about religion or politics or some of these other viewpoints.
But here's an interesting point, though. Is okay, so somebody's a vegan and I'm not. These two don't bash against each other. You're a vegan and you're over there. Great. Okay, if you're coming around for dinner, I have to account for that. But then if you were allergic to peanuts, I'd have to do that too. So, if somebody expresses an opinion and it's hanging there in the space with which two people meet, that opinion doesn't need to be received through a filter. It can just be heard. It can just be heard. And as a coach, I often find myself sitting in front of people and, one of two things can happen in coaching. One of them is you get somebody who tells you their story, but it directly reflects your own life story. And that's one of the most dangerous places in coaching. They'll start telling you something and you're going, that happened to me, and you start getting sucked in. And then you get the opposite of that, which is where somebody starts telling you something which is diametrically opposed to who you are. So one of the things I've learned a lot about myself in that. So people who are driven solely by money, for instance, that's something I struggle with. I've realized as I've got older, it's all that drives them. The money's everything. Now that's absolutely fine. I've got no problem with that. But what I find fascinating is hearing how it affects the way they think and how it affects the way they drive and how it affects the way they work and how they relate to their family. And there are things I can learn from that. I can learn that actually, if I do want to go for money, behaviors like this are more likely to give me that. And I can then choose through my values filter whether I'm going to take that route or I'm just going to happily sort of plod along as I do, and not let that money worry me, and actually be more interested in the impact I can have on people and the influence I can have on bringing about change and things like that. But yeah, I think people seeing diversity for what it is without having a filter to protect yourself with is a skill that we should all learn.
Yeah, I think that speaks to Sarah's point that really diversity exists within each of us as well. We are all made up of different elements and different motivations and different priorities. I've just been working on an essay that draws on Jonathan Haidt's work. He has 6 pillars of values, and he addresses how different people from different political vantage points view these particular pillars. But if we can't agree on the basic core values, then we're really going to have a hard time accommodating one another. Whereas we can see their values, and now what we're arguing about is prioritizing. So now there's much more to work with. There's more respect, there's more willingness to give and take, there's more ability to hear another person's point of view. And part of that involves dealing with our own conflicted priorities as well.
I think one part of that is about understanding our own prejudices. for instance, I don't know whether any of you have taken the Project Implicit Harvard prejudicism tests that you can do, and you can sort of you do a test and you can find out sort of, it tells you whether you might be racist or sexist or things like that. And I did these tests because I was curious, only to discover I was mildly racist, and I was horrified. But of course I must be, I'm human. And I found that a very interesting thing, because knowing that meant I could now handle it. And as a result, I'm much better off in dealing with those issues. I was also horrified to discover I was mildly sexist, which I'm also something else I need to work on. But, you know, to know it means that we can then address it and embrace it. You know, we can actually address it. And I found that a really good way of freeing up. But to do that's it's quite a big step to accept it. I mean, to say it here, I've got used to it now, but you know, it's quite a big step, and there are a lot of people that might struggle with that for various reasons.
And I would urge you to focus on the mildly as well,
Yeah.
because
Well, there is that, yeah.
I think we're all mildly prejudiced about something
Of
somewhere.
course, absolutely, yeah. But I think if you said to somebody, you know, are you sexist? I mean, the first reaction would be no, rather than, well, actually, yeah, I am, which would be a rather odd response, wouldn't it? But it would be very refreshing to hear, but to know it.
I mean, I think most of us, I mean, probably virtually all of us are prejudiced towards people that we find physically attractive. And
Well, exactly, yeah.
and yet, you know, we know intellectually that physical appearance has absolutely nothing to do with character.
Yeah. Or your satisfaction in the relationship, to be honest with you.
True. Yeah. Sarah, I loved your comments around, you know, being intentional with building diverse teams, right? Surrounding yourself people who have different perspectives versus just a same version of you, because how else do you challenge your thinking and see a different perspective if you've got like-minded people around you and you've got groupthink everywhere? I think we have to be intentional, you know, as we build our teams and we surround ourselves to attain those different perspectives. That's how we grow.
Yeah.
I'm going to read that book.
So it's so good. It is written
Yeah.
so well.
Yeah.
And everyone that I've recommended it to has messaged me to be like, that was one of the best books I've read. Because it
Great.
really just
Great.
helps you understand human behavior. I mean, I even understood why my mother and I kept going around in circles about a certain argument. And then I called her about it and told her, and we both laughed. And then she started telling me something, and I tuned out as I was reading to tell her that my personality type is likely to tune out with detail and then jump back in with this. So it like was literally happening as we were talking. And we were able to laugh about it instead of, you know, DEFCON 1, go to World War III. So phenomenal book. But, you know, it's diverse experiences in general, not just at work, like in your life. You know, when we become adults and we have children and we take the same route to work every day, you know, we get these grooves like a vinyl record, and it only knows one direction to go. And then we get stuck in these patterns, and we don't know how to do anything, to your point earlier, Tim, other than be in that pattern. And we don't know, like sometimes we lose sight of when is it time to change the record? When is it time to try something different? So as much as possible, like just trying a new activity, even if you're horrible at it. You know, most of us don't like to do things that we suck at, so we avoid them. But like go do something and be the worst at it and celebrate that and just try. Like I tried 1 month for writing with my left hand only, and it was really slow and it was awful. But I'm gonna be honest, like while I could go faster with my right hand, they kind of look the same. So it wasn't too bad.
I love the idea of putting yourself out of your comfort zone by taking the book Surrounded by Idiots and opening it very obviously on the subway, and then, you know, holding it there and just quite merrily reading it as everyone else is
dangerously,
going,
Tim.
yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned driving home. My mother told me that when she was before she was married, she overheard a conversation between two coworkers. One asked the other for a ride home, and she said, "No, I can't take you." She said, "Well, but I'm right on your way." And the other person said, "But I don't go home that way." And my mother said that she resolved in that moment to drive home a different way every day.
That's great.
And there's research now that indicates that that's actually quite good for us. It can slow down the advance of Alzheimer's, dementia, and that apparently the number one thing to do for your mental health is to talk to people you don't agree with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Assuming that you're not going to get into violent conversations, but make the effort to, when we have to explain ourselves to people who aren't on board, that's actually challenging us to articulate our beliefs in ways that we may never have done before.
Right.
We might have to work harder, and we might discover, gee, maybe I'm not as secure in this point of view as I thought I was. And to listen and demonstrate an ability to hear things from the other side. That's part of being a healthy person. It's part of a healthy society. Sorry, what was the title of the book again?
Surrounded by Idiots by
Surrounded
Thomas
by Idiots.
Erickson. Thomas Erickson with a K. I think, yeah, that to your point, Innocent, having conversations with people where, your viewpoint will be challenged. And then you quickly learn it's not about being right, but it is about, because often when we get upset, when somebody's challenging a viewpoint that we hold, it is because it is tenuously tied to our value system. And so there's a disconnect somewhere, but we don't like that being exposed. And so it's really good for us to figure that out, because maybe that was a belief, or maybe that was something 10 years ago that worked for you, and now it's no longer in alignment because you've grown and changed as a person. And in the light of new information, just like scientists do, right, you can change your stance. It's absolutely okay. You're not going to be rigidly holding to something, because if you get new information and it's very clearly contradicting, the whole structure of whatever your belief is on, you need to take that into account, right? I've certainly caught myself in arguments, mostly with my mom, about, I'm going to win this to the death. Yes, I know I'm wrong, but I don't care. I want to win. And when you let go of that, and you can start to go, oh, I never considered that perspective. You don't have to choose right away, but go away and think about it. Does it tie back to your value systems? Maybe it's no longer in alignment. That's okay. You can put it on the shelf. You can evolve that belief into something different.
Well, you know what they say, comparison is the biggest killer of human creativity. And if we start saying, I want to win, I want to be better, I want to be faster, I want to know more, whatever, in that environment, we start dumbing down our ability to be creative and have fun.
That's so true.
Makes it quite difficult for Olympic athletes and things like that, where it's all about comparison. I find there's a discussion for you, Jonas, at another time.
Yeah, and what the truth is that, and here there's that word truth, and I believe, and I come from a belief system that believes that there is such a thing as absolute truth, but we also believe that absolute truth is unknowable for us as human beings. And so it comes down to perspectives on truth, and that you can have fierce arguments, debates, and disagreements, passionate, and yet recognize that we may be looking at the same thing from two different angles, and that each of us has a perspective on truth. Neither of us can see all of it. And even though it looks like, or it seems like, we're arguing black and white, right and wrong, good or evil, but not necessarily. It can simply be two different perspectives. And making the effort to bridge that distance is a tremendously valuable and gratifying exercise.
Yeah, that's so true. And Jonas, and too, your experience in life, right? The way you were raised, the situations, the trials that you went through shapes your perspective. Another person might have a different environment and a different, a different way that they were raised. And I think people have different truths and different perspectives and different realities because of the way they were nurtured as well. So I think taking that into account is important as well, to try to empathize with somebody who didn't have your experience, had more difficult experience as an example. How do you empathize with that individual? How do you learn from them? How do you change your perspective? Because you don't know what that's like. It starts with dialogue, I think.
Yeah, it also has to do with personal personality types. People who rank higher for conscientiousness tend to be more politically conservative. People who rank higher for openness tend to be more politically liberal. So add to that environment, who my parents were, who our neighborhood was, who my friends were, where into college, all these factors, we may be far less in control of our beliefs than we like to think we are. And engaging with other people gives us the opportunity to actually take back some of that control. Which looks like a good place to wrap things up.
I think so. I bought the book, by the way, whilst the magic of the internet, as we've been talking.
Great.
So I'm looking forward to that coming through.
Yeah.
We're
me too.
multitasking too.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. I look forward to your feedback. I mean, I found myself chuckling a lot as I was reading it. So you'll learn a lot about yourself, about other people, and it's really good.
All right, well, I think that's a good place to stop. And we managed to avoid talking about the president, which I'm very grateful for. And always grateful. The guests that I invite back again and again, which includes all three of you, are people that demonstrate a capacity for being willing to look at things from different sides, and understand there's a difference between ethics and legality. Not try to force an issue, but really try to consider different points of view. So I thank you all for your time, for your perspectives, for your insights. Tim Hawks, Sarah Calmeida, Yolanta Pomialto, you're always welcome here, and look forward to the next time we can be together. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, submit your idea if it's compelling. We'll use it for a future episode. And until then, encourage you to continue, as always, grappling with the gray.